Before we begin, I need you to sit with this for a second because what I'm about to say might feel uncomfortable. Someone, right now, knows your age, understands your story, sees your past, and still chooses you. Not casually, not temporarily, deeply. And the unsettling part, something is about to shift tonight. If you want to understand what most men never figure out about attraction, emotional bonds, and the psychology behind why someone stays, then subscribe to this channel and like this video, because what you're about to hear isn't surface level advice, it's truth most people avoid. Now, listen carefully. Men are often taught that value is tied to time, that your age defines your desirability, that you're either too early to be taken seriously or too late to be wanted fully. But what no one tells you is this: emotional attachment doesn't follow a calendar, it follows impact. A woman doesn't fall for your age. She falls for how you make her feel about herself when she's around you. And here's where it gets intense. When someone loves you after knowing your age, your flaws, your past decisions, it means they've already processed the logical reasons to walk away and chose not to. That kind of attachment is not accidental, it's psychological. It's emotional investment layered over time. But there's a hidden tension inside that love, because the moment someone accepts you fully, they also become vulnerable to losing you. And tonight, something triggers that vulnerability. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's silence, maybe it's something you say without realizing the weight behind it. But whatever happens, it reveals something deeper than love. It reveals fear. You see, when someone loves you deeply despite everything they know about you, they are constantly balancing two emotions at once: connection and uncertainty. And men often misread this. You think consistency keeps someone, but intensity, especially emotional unpredictability, is what exposes the truth. Tonight is not just another night. It's a moment where her feelings either deepen into something irreversible or begin to pull back quietly. And the dangerous part? You won't even notice it happening unless you understand what to look for. There's something most men never realize about emotional attachment. It doesn't always grow in comfort. Sometimes it grows in confusion. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but psychology doesn't care about what feels logical. It cares about what creates emotional imprint. When someone loves you deeply, especially after knowing your flaws, your age, your past mistakes, they don't just see you as you are. They see the emotional pattern you create inside them. And here's the part that hits harder than anything else: that love is not stable in the way you imagine it. It's alive, it breathes, it reacts. So when I say tonight changes something, I don't mean some dramatic movie moment. I mean a shift so subtle you might dismiss it completely. But she won't, because women don't always express emotional shifts immediately. They feel them first, then they analyze them, and only after that they act differently. You might say something tonight without thinking much of it: a delayed reply, a tone shift, a joke that lands differently than intended, or even your silence when she expected presence. And to you, it's nothing. But to her mind, it becomes a signal. And signals, when repeated or emotionally charged, turn into meaning. This is where attraction becomes complicated, because when she loves you deeply, she is not just responding to your actions. She is responding to her interpretation of your emotional consistency. And inconsistency, real or perceived, creates internal tension. Now, listen carefully. That tension is not always bad. In fact, it's often what intensifies emotional bonding. But there's a threshold, a point where curiosity turns into doubt, where attachment turns into self-protection. And you never see that line when you're the one inside the connection. Men often think love is proven through big gestures, but from a psychological standpoint, love is maintained through emotional predictability and safety. However, desire behaves differently. Desire is triggered by contrast, by space, by mystery, by the feeling that someone cannot be fully decoded. And tonight, those two forces collide inside her. Love pulls her closer. Uncertainty makes her pause. And when those two emotions exist at the same time, the mind becomes hyper-aware of everything you do. Even things you think are irrelevant suddenly become meaningful, because she's no longer just interacting with you, she's interpreting you. This is where most men misunderstand everything. They assume that if someone loves them, that love is a fixed state, like a destination you arrive at, and then relax into. But emotional reality doesn't work like that. Love is not a locked door. It's a living system that responds to signals, emotional safety, and perceived value. And when I say value, I don't mean money, looks, or status. I mean emotional impact. How strongly you affect someone's inner world determines how strongly they stay emotionally attached to you. Now, here's what's happening inside her mind right now, especially after knowing everything about you, your age, your past, your imperfections, your reality. She didn't just accept you intellectually, she adapted emotionally. That adaptation is powerful, but also fragile, because once a woman adjusts her emotional expectations around a man, she starts building an internal story about him. A story that gives her certainty, a story that makes her feel safe in her feelings. But tonight, something challenges that story. Not necessarily a betrayal, not necessarily a mistake. Sometimes it's something far more subtle. Your emotional distance in a moment she expected closeness, or your presence when she expected space, or your calmness when she expected reaction. And when reality doesn't match the internal story, the brain does something very specific. It starts updating, quietly, automatically, without asking permission. This is where attachment begins to shift shape. And here's the part most men never notice. She won't tell you immediately. In fact, she may behave normally, even warmly. But internally, her mind starts running background analysis. She replays your words. She studies your tone. She searches for patterns, not because she wants to doubt you, but because her emotional system is trying to restore balance, because uncertainty creates discomfort, and the mind always seeks resolution. So, she begins asking herself silent questions. Did I misread him? Is he still the same? Why did that feel different today? And none of these questions require dramatic events. They only require emotional contrast. And once contrast enters the connection, perception begins to shift. Not instantly, not loudly, but deeply. And what you call a normal interaction, she may interpret as the beginning of change. That is why tonight is not about what happens outside. It's about what begins to shift inside her perception of you before anything is ever said out loud. There is a point in every emotional connection where logic stops leading and interpretation takes over. And once that happens, you are no longer dealing with what you actually did. You are dealing with what it meant to her nervous system. This is where men often lose control of the narrative without even realizing it, because you might still be acting the same, speaking the same, showing up the same, but she is no longer receiving it the same way. Her mind has started filtering you through emotion instead of reality, and that shift is powerful. When a woman loves you deeply, she doesn't just observe your behavior. She assigns meaning to your behavior based on emotional expectation. So if you are warm when she expected reassurance, it becomes comfort. But if you are distant when she expected warmth, it becomes confusion. And confusion is where emotional rewiring begins. Now, here's what is quietly happening inside her tonight. She is trying to reconcile two versions of you, the version she feels safe with, and the version she just experienced in a moment of uncertainty. And the brain does not like contradictions. So it starts choosing. It either strengthens attachment by finding explanations that restore safety, or it weakens attachment by storing emotional hesitation. And this is not a conscious choice. It is automatic psychology. This is why small moments can create disproportionate emotional weight. A delayed response, a shorter message, a change in tone, a shift in attention. Things that you might forget in seconds can stay in her mind for hours, because emotional systems don't measure importance by logic. They measure it by impact. And tonight something lands with impact, not because it is dramatic, but because it disrupts expectation. And when expectation is disrupted, attention intensifies. She starts paying closer attention to everything about you, your pauses, your words, your emotional rhythm. Not because she is trying to control you, but because she is trying to understand you again. And here's the part men rarely accept. When someone has to re-understand you emotionally, they are no longer fully inside certainty. They are inside recalibration. And recalibration is the beginning of emotional change, even when love is still present. So while you may still feel connection, she is now experiencing analysis layered over connection. And that combination changes everything about how she holds you in her mind. Now, I want you to understand something most men never get taught in relationships. Emotional attachment is not just about how much someone loves you, it's about how stable they feel inside that love. Because love without stability slowly becomes thought heavy, and thought heavy love becomes vulnerable to interpretation, doubt, and emotional comparison. And this is where tonight becomes psychologically important. Inside her mind, she is not just feeling you anymore. She is evaluating the emotional rhythm you create, not in a conscious, logical way, but in a deeply instinctive one. Every person has an internal emotional baseline for the people they love, a kind of expected pattern, how they speak, how they respond, how they show up emotionally. That baseline becomes safety. And when something disrupts that baseline, even slightly, the brain treats it like missing information. And missing information creates mental looping. She starts replaying moments without realizing it, not because she is confused about love, but because she is trying to restore emotional predictability. And here is where men misunderstand attraction completely. They think consistency is boring, but psychologically, consistency is what anchors emotional safety, and safety is what allows love to stay open instead of defensive. However, there is a second layer you need to understand. While safety maintains love, emotional contrast maintains awareness. Too much predictability, and she stops noticing you emotionally. Too much unpredictability, and she starts monitoring you emotionally. And tonight, she is in that monitoring phase. That means her attention is higher than usual, not relaxed, not passive, active. She is reading between your lines now. Even your silence carries meaning. Even your normal behavior feels slightly amplified. And this is where emotional attachment becomes sensitive. And this is where emotional attachment becomes sensitive, because when someone starts monitoring instead of simply experiencing you, they are no longer fully inside emotional flow. They are inside emotional analysis. And analysis always comes with one silent question underneath everything. Is something changing here? And she may not ask it out loud, but her nervous system is already reacting to it. And when the nervous system starts reacting before the mind fully understands why, that is when emotional depth either strengthens through reassurance or starts slowly restructuring itself into caution. Not because love is disappearing, but because certainty is being tested. There is a moment in emotional psychology that most men never notice, but women feel it instantly. It's the shift between being emotionally experienced and being emotionally interpreted. Meaning is where everything becomes powerful and dangerous at the same time, because meaning is not fixed. And once that shift happens, the relationship stops being purely about connection and starts becoming about meaning. Meaning is where everything becomes powerful and dangerous at the same time, because meaning is not fixed. It evolves based on emotion, timing, and internal state. So, tonight, when I say something is happening inside her, I don't mean she is making a decision about you in a dramatic way. I mean she is updating her internal emotional map of you, slowly, quietly, continuously. And this update is not based on one single moment. It's based on the accumulation of emotional signals she is receiving from you right now. Your tone, your timing, your presence, or absence in certain emotional spaces. And her mind is doing something very specific with all of it. It is trying to categorize you again, because when emotional consistency feels slightly altered, the brain doesn't panic first. It organizes. It starts sorting. Is this the same connection? Is this just a phase? Is he emotionally stable in how he shows up? And while she may still care deeply about you, her perception is no longer static. It is active, and active perception is always more sensitive. Now, here's the part that changes everything. When a woman is emotionally attached but slightly uncertain, she does not detach immediately. She observes more. She feels more. She pays closer attention to details she previously ignored. Not because she wants to find something wrong, but because her emotional system is trying to restore clarity. And clarity is more important to the mind than intensity. This is why even small shifts in you can feel large inside her, because she is no longer just receiving your behavior, she is measuring it against emotional memory. And emotional memory is powerful. It remembers how you made her feel in moments of safety, and it compares that to how she feels now. If there is alignment, attachment deepens. If there is mismatch, reflection begins. And reflection is where emotional distance quietly starts forming. Not a separation, but as awareness that something has changed, even if she cannot define what yet. And that undefined feeling is what keeps her mentally engaged longer than she expects. This is the part most men misunderstand the most, and it's the reason they either lose depth in a connection or misread what is actually happening in real time. Because when someone loves you deeply, their attachment doesn't disappear just because uncertainty appears. Instead, it becomes more complex. It splits into layers. One layer continues to feel connection, familiarity, and emotional pull toward you. That part doesn't shut off easily. It is built from shared emotional moments, trust, and internal bonding. But another layer begins to activate at the same time, the observing layer. She still cares about you, but she is also analyzing how that care feels right now compared to before. And this observing layer is what becomes active when something feels slightly different, slightly off, or slightly unfamiliar in your emotional presence. Not wrong, not bad, just different enough to notice. And when both layers exist together, the mind enters a state of emotional dual processing. She still cares about you, but she is also analyzing how that care feels right now compared to before. And this is where tonight becomes psychologically significant, because something in your presence, your energy, or your communication style has triggered that second layer. Not enough to break attachment, but enough to awaken awareness. And awareness changes everything internally. It makes her more conscious of you than usual, more aware of how she responds, more aware of how you respond, more aware of the emotional rhythm between you both. And here is what men often fail to recognize. When someone becomes more aware of a connection, they are not losing interest. They are stepping outside pure emotion and entering reflection. And reflection is where emotional meaning gets rewritten. So, even if nothing dramatic happens tonight, something subtle is still happening underneath. She is forming a clearer internal picture of you, and that picture is no longer based only on emotion. It is now shaped by observation, comparison, and interpretation. This is why she may seem slightly different afterward, not distant in an obvious way, but thoughtful, quieter in her reactions, more measured in her responses, because her emotional system is processing something it cannot immediately categorize. And when the mind cannot categorize, it pauses emotionally, not to leave, but to understand. And in that pause, perception evolves, and what she feels for you doesn't end. It changes its structure from pure feeling into conscious awareness of feeling.